workshop focused on coal mine methane and NDC enhancement. My name is Nathan Borgford Parnell. I am the Science Affairs Lead for the Climate and Clean Air Coalition and co-lead with my colleague Sophie Bonnard at the Climate and Clean Air Coalition of the MRAP program. There we go. Next slide, please. We have a very exciting lineup of presenters today to present good practice examples and key advice on how to enhance ambition towards particularly methane mitigation in NDCs around coal mine methane abatement. And 2 country examples of good practice from Colombia and from Kazakhstan, discussing how they have been addressing this particular issue. And then I hope that we will engage at the end of this session in a robust question and answer. So please do save any questions that you have for any of the presenters until that Q&A period. And I expect and hope that everybody will participate in that fully. I should say I am joined by colleagues from UNECE and the Global Methane Initiative to speak about their experience and work program around coal mine methane abatement and guidelines, and then we will have the presentations from the 2 country representatives, Kazakhstan and Colombia, after a short introduction from myself. So next slide, please. So as I hope many of you know, but it's worth repeating, the Global Methane Pledge, which was launched in 2020, now includes 150 countries, and those countries have collectively committed to take action at a national level to collectively reduce global anthropogenic methane emissions by at least 30% below 2020 levels by 2030. We have under 6 years left to meet that goal, and coal mine methane is one of the critical sources of anthropogenic methane that we can control within that period, and so is a critical target to help us achieve that collective ambition. The CCAC is providing secretariat services for the GMP, and within that, we are the first port of call for countries that are interested in enhancing their ambition on methane mitigation in their NDCs and through national planning processes. And in service of that, in 2021, we launched the Methane Roadmap Action Program that provides direct support to countries through workshops like this, and financial and expert assistance and other resources to help countries really understand what their existing commitments are around methane, and how to enhance those commitments and expand on them in a way that's consistent with sustainable development objectives and our collective climate objectives. Next slide. We have a number of tools and vehicles for assistance to countries. Those are all provided for on our expert assistance, methane technical assistance portal on our website. But in short, we provide a number of tools through that portal and through MRAP that are listed here. This includes a template and workshop series and workbooks to help countries develop national methane roadmaps and to use those to support and enhance their NDC and biennial transparency reporting processes. We provide expert consultations and national planning support and policy regulatory support, as well as financial assistance to support the above for countries that want to take rapid action on methane, as well as all super pollutants that are covered by the CCAC. Next slide. In addition to the specific methane resources, the CCAC has a number of tools and working structures that are of great use to and benefit to many of our partners and to Global Methane Pledge signatory countries. This includes our sectoral hubs. We have 6 sectoral hubs, and 3 of them specifically are relevant to the the main sectors for methane emissions, that's agriculture, waste, and fossil fuels. This is a space where countries, intergovernmental organizations, financial institutions, private sector entities, and other experts can come together, share best practices, and learn and forge and collaborate, and create projects and raise funding to support real implementation in those sectors around particularly methane mitigation, but for all pollutants that are relevant to the CCAC. We have a small scale expert assistance fund to support GMP partners that are participating in MRAP. That's $30,000 to $50,000 available to ODA eligible countries who are participating in the Methane Roadmap Action Program, and that source of funding is available for countries specifically this year and next, around the BTR enhancement and NDC 3.0 enhancement that we're talking about here today. In addition to that, we have larger funding windows for longer and more involved projects through our country expert expression of interest process that's available to specifically CCAC partner countries that are ODA eligible. Next slide, please. So, what is the purpose of this workshop? We have engaged this year in a new form of MRAP workshops focused specifically on NDC enhancement, because we recognize that the NDC 3.0 is the real critical opportunity for global commitment towards GMP consistent levels of methane mitigation within this decade. Next year, every country that is a party to the Paris Agreement is expected to submit their updated NDCs, their NDC 3.0s. And within the NDC 3.0, the expectation is that one, that the commitments for mitigation be economy-wide. They cover all Kyoto basket greenhouse gases. That includes methane, that they be more ambitious and deeper than the previous NDC mitigation commitments, and that the new endpoint for those mitigation commitments reach to 2035. This is the last formal update to the NDC process within this decade. NDC 4.0 is due in 2030. So this is really the moment for the countries of the world, parties to the Paris Agreement and parties to the Global Methane Pledge, to come together and collectively acclaim and transparently address their collective commitments to reduce methane and indeed all greenhouse gases in ways at levels that are consistent with our 1.5 pathway, 2 and well under 2 pathway commitments, as well as the target of the GMP. Next slide. So we in the CCAC have been working on enhancing NDCs since before they were NDCs. We wrote our first guidance on how to use short-lived climate pollutants to enhance ambition around NDCs back in 2014 for the intended nationally determined contributions, and have been supporting our partner countries going all the way back to 2014 to begin to expand on and be more transparent about the levels of ambition that they have for SLCP mitigation and the measures that they plan to take in their NDCs. And we've really been quite successful. Success has many parents, so I can't say that the CCAC is 100% responsible for these successes, but we have seen a really quite significant increase in the number of countries, the percentage of countries that are including methane within their nationally or their economy-wide targets. So they've gone from around 50% in the first INDCs all the way up to about 92% of total coverage. That's the bottom left bar, the dark blue bar there, in the latest NDCs. We'd like to see that number reach 100% this year. I think we can fully expect that to be the case. And that is, I think, a really very successful campaign around methane in the economy-wide target. What we have been less successful on, and what we really are focused on for the NDC 3.0, are the level of transparency and commitments, the explanation of how countries are going to or plan to and commit to achieve those economy-wide reductions at a sectoral, subsectoral, even project level. And if you see these bars on the right side of the screen here, show what the percentages of current NDCs that include more specific, transparent detail about the how of how to reach the economy-wide mitigation targets, specifically around methane in the three key sectors. And you see waste, we're right around 50% of current NDCs. Agriculture, we're about 36% of total NDCs have more explicit and transparent information about targets in the agricultural sector. The fossil fuel sector, the energy sector, from a IPCC standpoint, is where we see the least amount of transparency and detail, and that is where we really are focusing the greatest amount of attention within this year and next, because that is where the greatest amount of gettable methane mitigation is in total tons terms within this decade. And the coal mining sector is a key element of that we want to focus on here today. Next slide. So for those of you who have participated in other MRAP workshops, whether online or in person over the last couple of years, I'm sure you have seen this set of blocks. This is the set of blocks that describes the components of our national methane roadmap methodology. It's built around 5 building blocks that are flexible and can be changed to meet the needs and particular interests and politics and economic situation and emissions profile of a particular country. But we do push for every country to have all 5 of these components within their national plan. That includes developing robust inventories, specifically for methane in the case of MRAP, and then building block 2 is conducting analytics, really looking at the multiple benefits and impacts of mitigation measures to address emissions that were assessed in the inventories, the economic impacts and benefits, and exploring and leading then to building block 3, establishing targets based upon the analytics that were conducted in building block 2. Building block 4, establishing and being clear about the implementation pathways, the policies and measures and regulations that would need to be in place and are in place, hopefully, to ensure implementation of the measures to meet the target. And then, of course, last but not least, monitoring, reporting, and verification. In the frame of the reporting that all countries are engaged in, or parties to the Paris Agreement are engaged in right now, building blocks 1 and building block 5 fit most neatly into the biennial transparency reports, which is part of the Enhanced Transparency Framework Agreement of the Paris Agreement. Every country that is a party to the Paris Agreement is working to submit with a few exceptions, submit their first BTRs by the end of this year. And then the analytics, target setting, and policies and measures and implementation pathways are most closely related to the NDC commitments and processes that we describe in our guidance. Next slide. So very quickly, why is it important to make sure that your countries are being transparent and explicit and as detailed as possible about how you're going to expect to reduce your national methane emissions to support your economy-wide targets? One really key reason that we are finding more and more important is that it helps unlock finance. The financial institutions, particularly the World Bank, but the other multilateral development banks, are looking to the NDCs and the NDC 3.0 in particular to provide guidance, support, and justification for the mobilization of resources to support infrastructure and development grants and loans. This is one of the key reasons why a country really should look long and hard at providing not new targets for methane within their NDCs that are independent of their economy-wide target, but should be more detailed about how they expect to reduce methane in the key sectors, what the costs and benefits of those of the measures that would lead to those reductions would be in their NDCs, so that can quickly be translated into meaningful resources to support action. In addition to that, methane is a short-lived climate pollutant. It contributes to not only near-term warming, but also air pollution by helping form tropospheric ozone, which harms human health and ecosystem health. By articulating actual changes in methane, it will allow you and your countries to express not just the tons of carbon that will be reduced, but the actual human impacts that would be caused by reducing, in that case, air pollution by reducing methane. That's another critical advocacy tool that can be in your NDC to support greater and greater engagement with other stakeholder groups and enhance and strengthen the sustainability of your pledges and ensure that they're actually met by 2030 and 2035. Next slide, please. So I've gone through much of this. I'm not, just one last point. These are some good practices that we have. We're going to be promulgating our official guidance on how to address methane and the other short-lived climate pollutants in NDCs by the end of this month. But the top line elements of this, as I've somewhat described in my presentation, are that it is really critical that countries be explicit about how they expect to reduce, at a project level or a sectoral level, methane in their NDC pledges and how that feeds into their economy-wide target. The benefits of being transparent and explicit about the measures and the sectoral targets are significant and potentially transformative. And now I'd like to hand it over to my colleagues at the UNECE and Global Methane Initiative to talk in greater detail about good practice about how to actually get that done. So thank you very much for your time, everyone, and I hope you participate in the Q&A.
Thank you very much, Nathan. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, colleagues. We are pleased to be here today for this workshop organized jointly with the Climate and Clean Air Coalition, the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe, and the Global Methane Initiative to discuss, as we've been already starting, how to increase ambition in mitigating methane emissions from coal mines and how to support countries in reflecting such targets in their upcoming NDC, the new National Climate Action Plans. My name is Chiara Gianberardini, and I'm the Secretary of the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe Group of Experts on Coal Mine Methane and Just Transition. I also wish to acknowledge that today in this workshop we have the presence of the chair of our group of experts, Mr. Ray Pilcher. Good morning, Ray. Thank you for joining us. And he will be pleased to exchange with all of you during the workshop and especially during the conversation and answer any of your questions. And today I'm also presenting jointly with Volya Roshanka. Volya?
Hi, everyone. Hi, everyone.
Yes. Volya is from the Global Methane Initiative and is also the chair of one of UNECE task forces, part of this group of experts, specifically looking at methane emission reduction. So next slide, please. To give you a very quick overview of our organizations, UNECE was set up in 1947 and is one of 5 United Nations regional commissions. Among its intergovernmental bodies, we have a group of experts that deals with coal mine methane and just transition, and one that deals with gas, and these groups discuss methane emissions mitigation. Among others, this is done through concrete activities carried out by 3 task forces, one on methane emission reduction, one on just transition, and one on safe operations and closure of coal mines. The Global Methane Initiative, GMI, was launched in 2004 and is an international public-private partnership focused on reducing barriers to the recovery and use of methane as a valuable energy source from key sectors, including oil and gas, coal mines, and biogas. UNECE and GMI have a long-standing partnership on methane abatement. Next slide, please. So this we have already, I think, dealt with. Nathan has already said the all good reasons for taking action on methane from the coal mine sector. Very briefly, again, according to the 2021 Global Methane Assessment, the 1.5 Celsius target contained in the Paris Agreement cannot be achieved at a reasonable cost without reducing baseline methane emissions by 30 to 60% by 2030 from 2020 levels. This would require substantial but achievable mitigation from all major methane emitting sectors, of which about 60% is from fossil fuel, and methane emission from fossil fuel come mainly from oil, gas, and coal, approximately 1/3 each. So acting on coal mine methane emission is critical to achieve the Paris Agreement, the goals committed in the Global Methane Pledge, and the Sustainable Development Goals. So today we are focusing on mitigating methane emission from coal mines. While the overall goal remains to phase out coal mining, reducing coal mine emissions is important while the mines are still in operation, as well as when they are closed or abandoned, as approximately 10 to 20% of emissions from underground coal mines continue also after the mines are closed. Methane mitigation in the coal mining sector takes place through capture and use of coal mine methane. This is among the most effective near-term options to reduce the carbon footprint of the mining sector, and it also enhances mine safety and productivity, localizes energy production, and improves air quality and health. I now pass the floor to Volja to present available technologies and suggested steps to include CMM abatement in the NDCs. Volja, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Chiara. So I'll start by presenting a brief overview of technologies and practices that I used that exist for mitigating methane at coal mines. And of course, first thing to note is that mitigation approach varies by country, as well as mine conditions. So for example, not all coal mines are gassy. Similarly, coal seams might have low permeability, so it might not be feasible to use a certain technology at a certain coal mine. So it's really case specific. And by the way, I should mention that we do have trainings on pre-feasibility assessments of drainage systems as well as AMM systems on our website, should somebody want to take a look at it in more detail. Second thing to remember is that mitigation technologies, they exist at varying costs, and cost effectiveness really depends on the country circumstances as well. So I want to preface this as well. Then I guess to start the overview broadly, we have two types of coal mines: surface coal mines, or in some countries they're called open cast, and underground coal mines. So emissions from surface coal mines are diffuse and much harder to capture them. So sometimes there's an option to capture methane in advance at surface coal mines, but there have been projects like that at pilot tests, but we're not seeing a whole lot of projects like that. So pretty much for surface mines, you see different stages of mining: before mining, during mining, and after mining. But for surface mines, it's only before mining that we are aware of, and there's not a lot of projects like that. So underground coal mines, they have the highest potential for mitigation, really. And as you can see from the graphic, mitigation can happen at any stage of mining, the mining process. Of course, if you capture methane ahead of mining, you get the highest concentration. So that's probably your highest potential. You have the highest methane concentration, but you have to install pre-drainage systems, and such methane can be used for destruction. And when we're talking about high concentration, I mean 60% to 80%. It really depends on a coal mine, and if the coal mine is gassy, of course. During mining, most of the coal mines, underground coal mines, would install ventilation systems to bring fresh air into the mine, and that such ventilation air methane, as we call it, would be very low concentration, less than 2%, most commonly less than 1%, and even below that. And such methane is very low concentration. It's hard to destroy, so you actually need auxiliary fuel to destroy that. But it accounts for probably 60 to 80% of emissions in some coal mining countries. So there's a lot of it, and it does come out in one place. So sometimes we do talk about it as an opportunity for mitigation on a broader scale when you compare it to CCUS and other similar technologies, it does represent a significant opportunity because there's a lot of it, even though it's low concentration. But perhaps when we compare to other technologies for mitigation, it's actually a significant opportunity in coal mining countries. While coal is being mined, we still could install, or coal mining companies could still install GOP drainage systems and extract such methane, which would be medium concentration, so below 60%, maybe 30 to 60%. Again, this is just a ballpark figure. It really depends on the situation. And such methane can also be used or destroyed if it cannot be used effectively. When coal mines close, methane can still leak for a number of years, provided such coal mines don't flood. And in such cases, there's an opportunity for pre-closure engineering planning, such as filling shafts and installing pipework for production of abandoned mine methane. If these things are not done ahead of closure, it becomes much more dramatically expensive to extract methane from a closed or abandoned coal mine. So something to keep in mind. Perhaps this is an opportunity for policymaking. Of course, wells would have to be installed to capture and use destroyed abandoned mine methane. And another thing to keep in mind that at this point, methane concentrations would be declining as there's no more production going on. So from policymakers' perspective, it would be important that such projects are developed as soon as possible after closure. And so the requirements that projects might have, such as transfer of ownership, permits, and others, need to be effective, but at the same time expedient. So going back to the main topic, next slide, please. Next, going back to the main topic of the event, we recommend the following steps for including coal mine methane abandonment in NDCs, using this approach that we've developed to understand the context, engage stakeholders, establish baseline, set goals, develop policies and programs, implement policies and programs, and evaluate, report, and adapt. So first, taken from the top, understanding the context, such as emission sources, relevant policies, priorities, and goals. So it's important to understand what are the subsources of methane emissions from coal mining. Are they surface or are they underground? So if they're underground, maybe you have a lot of opportunity there. If the surface, could be a little more challenging, but some experience exists with pre-draining methane ahead of mining. Are there a lot of operating mines or closed mines? So perhaps it makes sense to focus on a certain segment of a subsource if we know that that source is important, rather than tackle maybe the whole sector. Who owns methane in a coal mine? What government agencies require and regulate air quality standards? What about coal mine safety is another important regulator. Are there incentives for capture and use of methane from coal mines? So these are some of the important questions that policymakers can ask. Engaging relevant stakeholders cannot be understated. It is important to input policy ideas, to solicit input on feasibility and costs. This project can be very expensive, and technology might not be available, so it's important to think through, but also listen to the industry perspective and local community concerns. It's definitely going to help with implementation of policy down the road. Collect and clarify technical information and data for subsequent analysis, program design, and reporting, and inform on the policy proposals, new rules, and hopefully there's a commenting period that allows engaged stakeholders to comment. Next slide, please. Next, establish a baseline, such as, for example, a map of countries operating in closed coal mines can be created. Policymakers could identify mines that are gassy versus non-gassy. Can safety measurements be used to estimate baseline emissions? For example, in the United States, we have a solid approach to measure methane concentrations and flow for safety reasons. And so we've learned to use the same measurements of methane concentrations and flow at an underground coal mine to estimate emissions from that coal mine. So actually, you might be already, if you have similar safety requirements, you might be able to use that data to estimate your baseline emissions without even getting additional information or requiring additional measurements. Next, set goals and include those goals in NDCs. So is the objective to improve understanding of methane emission sources at this point? Should methane emissions be mitigated from only one source? Is that a threshold? Sometimes it's effective to just target the largest source as opposed to apply the same rules to all coal mines. Are there examples of successful coal mine mitigation projects in the country? For example, if a country has an abandoned mine methane project that is successful, maybe that's an easier place to start with. Are there mitigation technologies that are readily available in the country? So asking those questions could help arrive at the right policies and programs. Next step is to develop policy and programs. Will policies be prescriptive, performance-based, economic, or information-based? All of these decisions obviously develop on the policymaker and the country's objectives. And one other practice is perhaps identifying policies that already work in a country well. So if a country has a good fiscal policy, is that perhaps an easier point to start with as opposed to starting with a new policy that the country has not had experience with? So those are all some kind of practical considerations for developing your policy framework. Next. So implementing policies and programs, obviously it's very important to plan for access to financing for project developers and implementers, as well as track data to ensure compliance and meeting of goals. And then last but not least, evaluate, report, and adapt. It's very important to learn from initial steps. There's no perfect policy out there. I think the strength of policy is to be able to adapt and learn from how to achieve goals better. This is just a very brief overview of the steps that we have, but I just do want to mention that GMI and UCE have resources for all of these steps, and they're listed in the appendices. Happy to talk to anybody about those resources, and please do reach out for assistance. So the appendix, hopefully in the presentation, will have links to resources, but I'm not going to go over them right now. Next step, please. Next slide. And now I will say a few words. Sorry, go back to the previous one. I will say a few words about the global experience with policies for mitigating methane from coal mines. Globally, there's very limited experience with actually regulating methane emissions from coal mines, so actually requiring coal mines to do something. However, there is extensive experience supporting coal mine methane projects by reducing barriers and creating incentives, such as, for example, clear forms of ownership in coal mines, including easy transfer of ownership to third parties. So we've seen, for example, in Germany, they were able to if the coal mine was not using their methane, they were able to easily transfer ownership of that methane to a third party so that they can develop a project independently or in cooperation with the coal mine, rather. Cost-reflective prices on energy are beneficial for CMM projects. So your financial feasibility really depends on the energy prices. If CMM-based energy has to compete against low-cost subsidized fuel, fossil fuels, typically it'll be very difficult for a CMM projects to be feasible without any extra incentives or support. Strong implementation of safety requirements is also very important, because obviously if the country has a strict implementation of safety, coal mines motivated to extract that methane and use it potentially for beneficial use. So there's stronger motivation there. Access to energy markets is very important, both in terms of legislation, so allowing a country to, or allowing a coal mine to actually physically connect to a pipeline or to a electric infrastructure or electricity grid, but also physical infrastructure. If a project is very is very remote and far away from any physical infrastructure, obviously it'll be hard for such a project to access energy market. Effective environmental policies are very important, such as carbon markets, feed-in tariffs, obligations. It's typically an opportunity to create incentives. Tax incentives, we've seen countries reducing and removing royalties or taxes on production, income, or capital purchase for projects, as well as strong institutional support, which also cannot be understated. So it's typically designated CMM authorities and regulatory agencies that help identify policy options, technical barriers, reduce transaction costs, so that, let's say, project developers, they have somebody to reach out to ask questions. So in the United States, for example, we have a CMOP program, Global Methane Outreach Program, which manages, provides informational tools, but also responds to requests and relevant questions. Next slide, please. And now, speaking from a practical perspective, I want to mention that GMI tracks CMM projects around the world, and we are just completing our count of global projects, of database of global projects around the world. We know that gaps exist and information is not perfect. However, it's the best information that we have. We have identified there are about 250 projects in 14 countries. So those are coal mine methane mitigation projects. This includes both projects from drainage. So in the very beginning of the chart, so pre-mine drainage, before mining, projects that take place during mining, so perhaps GOB drainage, as well as ventilation and methane, as well as AMM projects, so towards the end of the life cycle of the mining process. So there's all kinds of projects. There are about 250 of them in 14 coal mining countries. China has the largest number of projects, 83, as you can see here on the chart. Perhaps this is not surprising, as China does account for 60% of global coal production. At the same time, policies in China are known to provide subsidies for projects. So these are very province by province, but we've heard of projects getting feed-in tariffs, exemptions from royalties, rebates on income taxes, and similar, as well as we're hearing about loans or perhaps grants for CMM utilization, such as ventilation air methane. The second largest country with the projects is the United States, 57 known projects. CMM projects are incentivized through, first of all, we have a publicly available database on emissions from coal mines. So anybody can find an underground coal mine that is emitting above a certain threshold and see its emissions over the years, annual emissions over the years. There are also state-level carbon markets and renewable energy portfolio standards, and those are known to be creating incentives as well for such projects, as mitigation projects are able to sell emission reduction credits into those systems. Next slide, please. In terms of use, what we know about such projects worldwide, top 3 uses for CMM globally, and that includes, as I said, ventilation and methane and abandoned mine methane, as well as drainage methane, is power generation. So most of the 250 projects, they go to power drainage, combined heat and power, as well as flaring. And we have seen a real increase in ventilation projects in China. We're about 16 projects where they enrich ventilation and methane with drainage gas to produce steam electricity. Those are very expensive, but it's very interesting that the policymakers decided that they did not want to just oxidize and destroy them. They actually wanted to enrich it and produce steam electricity. It might be a unique case, but it's certainly very, very interesting, and there's a large number compared to 5 to 10 years ago, long time of such projects. So the data that I have just presented, it will be posted on GMI website very soon. The best way perhaps is to sign up for our newsletter. If you're interested in delving in, we're going to have an Excel spreadsheet that shows the details of these projects to the extent that they're available. So please stay in touch and reach out with any questions. Thank you so much. Chiara, back to you.
Thanks, Polya. So now, before moving on to the country experience, we wanted to present the recent EU regulation on methane emissions reduction. As we said, we cannot emphasize more the importance of regulations when it comes to reducing the carbon footprint of the coal mining sector. As Volja mentioned earlier, there is limited experience globally in regulating methane emissions from coal mines. However, the EU is one such exception. In 2020, indeed, the EU published its methane strategy, setting Europe's ambition and aiming at curbing temperature increases and improving air quality in the fight against climate change. The strategy focuses on reducing methane emissions in the energy, agriculture, and waste sectors, which account for almost all human-related methane emissions. Key to delivering on the strategy is the EU regulation on methane emission reduction in the energy sector, adopted just recently at the end of May 2024. The regulation aims at reducing, and if you could please Jarir, put the slide, the next one. Thank you. So it aims at stopping avoidable release of methane into the atmosphere to minimize leaks of methane by fossil energy companies operating in the EU. And these rules introduced by the regulation include improved measurement, reporting, and verification of energy sector methane emissions, an immediate reduction in emissions through mandatory leaks detection and repair, and a ban on venting and flaring practices, which involve the release of methane directly into the atmosphere, with some exceptions, mainly for safety reasons, and methane transparency requirements on import, which is very important, collecting information on whether and how exporter countries and companies are measuring, reporting, and abating methane emissions. Specifically for coal, the regulation envisages a phase-out of venting and flaring of methane, ensuring the safety aspects in coal mines at the same time. It also obliges EU countries to establish mitigation plans in the case of abandoned coal mines. Now, the table that you can see on the screen shows methane monitoring and mitigation requirements by source. We focus here on emissions from active underground mines producing steam coal, as they are the key obligations in the regulation. The regulation does not specify limits for venting from ventilation shafts at coking coal mines, which will be specified in mid-2027. The regulation requires continuous source-level direct measurement and quantification of emissions at underground mines from July 2025. This is from venting from ventilation shaft, venting from drainage station, and flaring from drainage station. On venting from ventilation shafts, the regulation prohibits venting more than 5 tons of methane per kiloton of steam coal mined from 2027, which will be 3 tons from 2031. And exemptions apply in case of emergency.
And Chiara, I'm really sorry. I just want to make sure that our key country colleagues or dear country have time to present. So if you can just wrap up in the next minutes, please. Thank you very much.
Sounds good. Yes, I will. Thank you. So here you have in all the details about the regulations. So maybe I won't go in detail on all of them. I just want to say that the negotiations were quite difficult to reach this regulation. So just to say that there is experience from this, and there have been changes and discussion with the coal mine operators who raised their concerns, and these were addressed and discussed with the European Union. So let me just skip more on this and go to the next slide. I understand we have very limited time left. So here, I just want to say of the resources, again, that we have available. We have developed best practice guidance documents, providing accessible high-level guidance for senior corporate government and financial decision makers to lower the carbon footprint of the coal industry. This includes guidance on effective methane drainage and use in coal mines, methane recovery from abandoned coal mines, and others. We have also training courses. I think we have discussed that. We offer expert advice. I just want to one more invite you all to join us. You can contact us to join the group of experts and the task forces to discuss and collaborate on these topics. And we also offer technical cooperation to develop legislation, regulations, and incentive schemes to enhance coal mine methane. So maybe just on the last slide, it was a recap. Let me just read the titles on how we feel it is really important to include these targets, but also, as Nathan said, more details and concrete projects so that they can also be financed in the NDCs, and adopt regulation and incentivize the projects. It's important to have the right set of incentives. So thank you, Sophie, and looking forward to the presentation by countries and the Q&A.
Thank you so much, Chiara and Vola, for the most insightful presentation. And so without further ado, I would like now to turn to our dear colleague, Rustam Nasir-Khan from the Ministry of Ecology and Natural Resources from Kazakhstan, who is going to tell us a little bit about Kazakhstan's experience. And I hope all of you are able to stay with us for a little extra time. So we have time to also hear from our colleague from Colombia afterwards on their experience and close this workshop. Do not hesitate as well to ask questions in the chat. Rustam, I can see that you're sharing your screen now. The floor is yours. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Hello, just to check, can you hear me?
Yes, very well, thank you.
Okay, well, first of all, thank you very much for calling, and I think these kind of events are quite important to showcase best practices and experience of the different countries given unique situations. So just without further ado, I will actually just show our current methane snapshot and our plans for NDC update. So basically Kazakhstan is, well, I mean, we're not largest emitter, but we emit around like more than 400,000 CO2 equivalent tons. And methane for 2021 accounts for 17% of the national emissions. And main sectoral contribution comes from the energy sector and goes to the agriculture, and only 6% come from the waste and 0.2 from the LUCF. So just to understand why there is like 63% coming from the energy is because basically 54% of the primary energy comes from the coal. So, and around like more than 70% electricity generated comes from the coal. So we have quite an interesting situation where we have both open pit and underground mining, but at the same time, our underground mining accounts for 11%, only 11% of the coal by mass. But at the same time, underground mining accounts for 35% of the methane emissions, equivalent to the open pit mining. At the same time, we have a trend where basically for the last 5 years, 5 large mines were closed, and at the same time, no large mines were developed. But starting from the 1991, around 12 underground coal mines have been closed. Well, they were not like a giant one, but the issue with us is that around 70% of the coal mines, around 70 coal by mass comes from the 3 large coal mines. But the problem right now is, and basically it was coming from the 2021, is that the abandoned mines, particularly for the open pit, there is no clear pathway how to measure the emissions coming from it. And like beginning of the May 2021, around 12 abandoned mines were measured. We established procedures, measurements of the processing, and also the pipes installed. But still, from the industry itself, it's coming that there is no right way for proper estimation of it. So, there are two sides of the coal methane reduction for our country. The first of all, it's basically, as our colleagues mentioned, is a question of the safety. Just as an example, for the period of 21-23, we had already 700 situations in one mine with 111 injured and 63 deaths. And coming from the underground mine, and its priority actually to adopt best practices. This is where we see the clear co-benefits. On the other hand, it's not only about the policies, it's also about deploying, considering economic feasibility and also considering development of new technologies. So, for example, in the basin company, Bogatyr Coal, there is a case where they capture methane for on-site electricity generation, and they basically looking for local business opportunities, how to use waste slag and ash materials for road construction. And similar goes for one of the largest enterprises with Carmet for production of cinder blocks. Interestingly, also, there are plenty of R&D and R&D activities. I mean, DD stands for the deployment, where basically Carmet tried to implement. I mean, it also comes from the Soviet time, but still, more than 150 wells tried to adopt hydraulic fracturing as wells, and unfortunately, for underground mining, unfortunately, it didn't show to be much effective. Another case was with more expensive method, with the directional drilling method, with the 3 pilot wells, and the experience shows that with the depth more than 100 meters, it's quite. It shows the effectiveness, but it's still the cost efficiency is far from good. And another method was also degazing using a plasma pulse action, but at the current stage is like pilot research project. From the point of view of NDC, it's fairly basic, and what our CCAC colleagues from CCAC and UNECE has already mentioned. So first of all, we will try to looking forward for improving our MRE system, understanding what is the actual methane measurements are and methods how to improve it. There is also development of more advanced techniques for the estimation coming from the Earth observatory systems. And the low-hanging fruit is actually integration of existing systems. So whether it comes from Earth observatory, where we use on-site measurements with the satellite, or it comes from, for example, again, using the data from the, for example, ventilation systems or in the underground mines to understand what actual flows were of the methane. So the second stage is understanding of the, what is the methane reduction potential is based on, techno-economic assessment of operating potential itself, the economic feasibility coming from various financial models, and understand how to fund it, how to fund the project. Because on one hand, capturing methane and use it for electricity generation, but there are a lot of caveats, and sometimes projects show to have actually negative NPV value. So there is plenty of work on that, and from that we can get an understanding of the NDC commitment. So one of the ideas for the third NDC 3.0 is to have a dedicated commitment for SLCPs, including methane. And one of the selling points will be the co-benefits. I mean, one thing, it will be on the social side, so which includes basically hazard prevention of the unfortunate events in the pit. And on the other hand, it's also reduction in the air pollution. Another stage of the work is actually cross-sectoral analysis. And as colleagues mentioned, for example, there is a good ways to provide economic feasibility through certificates, but due to our electricity market design and regulations, we cannot readily adopt it, and this is where quite a lot of analysis will be required. And basically, having several different pathways, we'll have to do cost-benefit analysis, and this will come not only just from the simple financial models, economic estimates, but also from the stakeholder interviews and various engagements, and well, it's quite a lot of work coming in. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rustam, for this very insightful presentation on Kazakhstan experience. I'm quickly turning to, and we can look at questions in the chat, get back to the presenters with questions also as needed afterwards. But given the time, I'm right away turning to Mr. José Luis Díaz Ramos. Thank you very much for being with us from the Ministry of Mines and Energy of Colombia. So you are going to speak to us about Colombia's experience. Once again, thank you very much for making it, and sorry we are a little late.
No, don't worry. So you're gonna share the slides, right? Yeah, okay. Thank you. Okay, first of all, thank you for the invitation. I'm sorry for my voice. I've been very sick lately, but I'm gonna do my best. So my name is José Luis Díaz. I am part of the climate change team of the Ministry of Mines and Energy. So in the next one, please. So we are gonna talk today about three very broad topics. So the first one is about a little bit of coal mining in Colombia, the status and the emissions. The second one is about the NDC and other key energy policies that we have in Colombia related to this topic. And finally, what's next? So let's start with the first one. If you can, yeah, and the next one. So we're gonna start with the status and the emissions in the sector. So if you can share, if you can change the slide, please. So the first one is that due to the global tendencies and national commitments, coal production in Colombia has decreased recently. Between 2012 and 2023, coal production has peaked by 91.7 million tons and a minimum of 49.4 million tons in 2023. In the next one, however, we're going to see that the scenario in the next one, please. Sorry. So in the scenario of coal production by 2050, the scenario will not change dramatically, but we do project a decrease in overall coal production, with the production of thermal coal having a slight decrease throughout the years and an increase in the production of metallurgical coal by 2050. Estimation had some broad assumptions, but we do know is that the competitiveness of Colombian coal begins to decline as markets evolve to climate change commitments. And this is important as it will help us to focus the actions that we need to guarantee a reduction in emissions of the sector. But as here we are interested more in the MRV system and the emission, let's see in the next slide. So even though production is expected to decrease, emissions are projected to increase a little bit. This is because of two main sources, that is fuel consumption in the extraction and fugitive emissions. And this is important because it's what will help us focus our actions. So in the second sections, in the next slide, we can see that we have the NDC and other key policies. If you can change the slide now, please. So in the current NDC of Colombia, the country prioritized a private sector action to replace the use of coal for natural gas as fuel. In addition, the NDC prioritized the development on a plan to identify the operational conditions under new climate change scenarios for coal mining. Here it's important to say that this is specifically for coal, and this is important because we have other actions for mining in general, such as energy efficiency, among others, but this is just for coal mining. On the other side, for the long-term strategy, for instance, which aims for carbon neutrality in Colombia, we don't have specific actions for coal mining. However, in our energy transition policy, we prioritize the diversifications of regions dependent to coal. Now, in the next slide, the way in which Colombia actually translates its NDC into sectoral plans is through the development of integral plans for climate change management, or PIGCCs, due to the name in Spanish. The mines and energy sector is recognized for being one of the first ones in Colombia to publish its climate change plan, which represents an advancement of the actors involved and their commitment. In this plan, Colombia defines 3 specific actions for coal mining with considerable mitigation potential by 2050. Furthermore, as the integral climate change plan is for the overall sector, the ministry has created the integral climate change management plans for companies, or PIGCCE, to help companies advance in their actions. However, as you can see, and this is one of the areas of the discussions today, we haven't talked about coal mining and methane in a specific, and it's because right now we don't have specific ways to keep track of actions around coal mining and methane in our MRV, and we recognize that weakness. However, we recognize also the importance of methane mitigation, due to the importance of acting in the short term, which lead us to the third part of the presentation. If you can change, yeah. So what's next? And that's the most important part. So the Ministry of Environment of Colombia is coordinating the update of the NDC, which has multiple components, and also has a just transition as an integrative framework, including intergenerational and territorial approaches. And this is very important as hundreds of families depend on coal production in Colombia. The NDC process is currently setting the baselines. Today, I will focus on the mitigation component. In this process, from the Ministry of Energy, we are about to publish our last report advancement of the MRV system, which will help us identify the key areas in which we need to improve the MRV system in order to meet the GST goal of accelerating efforts towards the phase down of unabated coal power. So overall, we have advanced in improving methane mitigation in petroleum and gas. In fact, Colombia was the first country in South America to regulate methane emissions. This was done also as part of the process of a joint work between the NDC and the integral plans for climate change management. However, the regulation of fugitive emissions for mining is more complex in the country due to the characteristics of the mining in Colombia, which is largely informal and in a small and medium scale, which requires a completely different strategy than for the petroleum and gas sector. However, we recognize the importance again of mitigating methane due to the short time that we have to act for climate change. So we identified the need to amplify our work to mitigate the methane emissions beyond just oil and gas. So in the next one, we can see in the next slide. So as we recognize and we identified this need to improve our actions around methane and coal mining, in this process, the Climate and Clean Air Coalition, that is what brought us today here, in partnership with Poland, that is a Colombian NGO, will help us, the Ministry of Mining and Energy, to give training and identify key mitigation options for coal mining methane emissions in order to strengthen our MRV system. In the next one, I'm about to finish. In the next one, I finish. In the next slide. So we have key public entities for this to happen. We have the National Mining Agency and the entity in charge of the official data. We have NGOs, international cooperation. So methane mitigation has been a key part of the discussion. So for instance, the European Union has implemented different discussion tables to put this into the discussion. So this is very important. And finally, also the unions are very important because in the end, they are going to be the most affected by the changes that bring all of these actions. And this will help Colombia to meet commitments, not just for the UNFCCC, but also voluntary commitments such as the Global Methane Pledge and the Powering Past Coal Alliance. To finalize, it's very important to recognize that we get the results on coal mining methane mitigation due to the structure of the integral management plans for climate change. So the private integral climate change plans will help us to put more efficiently what we want in the action that we are going to identify with the help of the Clean and Climate Air Coalition. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, José Luis, for your insightful presentation as well, which give another picture of a in-depth picture of a country's experience. I see there are still 80 people with us, so I would propose that we do give 5 minutes to some Q&A. There are 2 questions in the chat. I don't know if Volha maybe or Chiara, you may have, or co-experts, you may have any preliminary answers to these. And if 1 or 2 other people who are in the webinar right now would like to ask a question, please raise your hand and I will unmute you.
Yes, hello. Happy to help, of course. Seeing the first questions, because anybody please let me know the typical CAPEX and OPEX for deploying methane destruction facility at an underground coal mine. I believe there's actually an expert in the audience that I'm seeing that that could better answer this question and that actually have studied this topic. So I don't want to, all I'm going to be doing is citing actually him. So I believe we said for, and that's Richard Mattis. I saw you in the audience. For CAPEX, we said it was something like $20 million for a VAM system and $12 million for operating expenses. Richard, please correct me if I'm wrong. If you can't speak up, then post in the chat. But it's one of the most expensive projects for a destruction facility of ventilation and methane. If I understood your question correctly, Deb. Anybody, Ray, feel free to jump in as well. I know you're here with us as well. If you wanted to add something to that.
And anyone who would like to take the floor, please just raise your hand. Please, Ray, go ahead. Thank you so much.
Yes, I was just going to make a comment related to what Volya just said, and she was very close, according to the document that we're actually working on now to be published on ventilation air methane destruction. So there will be some examples of the costing associated with those systems, but that's in the right ballpark. So yeah, stay tuned, and within a few weeks we'll have a document out that will help flesh that out a bit. Thanks.
Okay. For the next question, what is the best technical solution for methane emissions monitoring in satellite monitoring, a viable option for remote areas and abandoned mines? This is a challenging, and I would say it depends really on what the objectives are. I work on mitigation side of things, so for us, it's very important when we get emissions estimate that they are based on underground measurements, because typically project design or project development happens based on the ground measurements. So we have not really explored satellite monitoring so far, but I know satellites have given us a lot of insights into surface mines, which we thought were very low, medium, but that showed not to be the case in some locations. So I don't really have an answer on what is the best solution. I think it really depends on the goals. If your option, perhaps if your policy objective is to monitor compliance or know what the emissions are, perhaps also we still don't know how to use satellite imagery for estimating, for delivering inventories, for example. That gap hasn't been reached. If on the other hand, mitigation is your objective, underground measurements is necessary to be included as well. So I'll pause here, and perhaps others might add to that.
José Luis, please go ahead.
Yeah, from the Ministry of Mines and Energy in Colombia, we give it a try. Our around 2019, I understand, but we had different complications due to what you just mentioned. So there were different complications. We tried this with a Colombian university, but it was also a very broad. What we were expecting, it was a very broad estimations, but there were different complications in the process, so in the end we couldn't finalize. So we are gonna actually in this new alliance with Poland, we are gonna give it a second shot, but we understand that there are different complications due to, as you were mentioning, underground and above ground mining. So yeah.
Thank you very much. Chiara, would you like to add something?
Just wanted to say that we are indeed working with IMEO, the International Methane Emission Observatory, and our groups of experts to see how we can use both the on-site information and the satellite, and how we can have a partnership on reconciling the data available from different sources. And this is just ongoing discussion, but with a lot of hope that increased information will also help increased conversation, dialogue on the emissions.
Thank you very much. And I see there is another question on funding opportunities for MRV and quantification of fugitive methane emission from surface coal mines. But I propose that we take this one offline in the interest of time. If you can move to the next slide, Jaria, please, and great. So just before we close, I wanted to say so that this webinar is the last of this series on methane, enhancement of methane inclusion in NDC 3.0. So it has been a great pleasure to go through this journey with many of you that have joined all of the workshops. I want to thank very much all of our presenters today. Thank you so much. And again, sorry, we ran a bit over time. Just to say that although it's the last webinar of the series, it's not a goodbye. It's really a see you soon. So first and foremost, the recordings and the presentation from this webinar series will all be available on our website. You have the QR code on the slide right now. Also to tell you that the Methane Roadmap Action Program team will be present through all of the upcoming NDC 3.0 workshops that are going to be regional, which are being co-organized by UNEP, UNDP, UNFCCC, and the NDC partnership, and will be available to discuss how to enhance inclusion of methane into your NDCs at each of these workshops. There will be some dedicated sessions sometimes depending on the region, so more to come, and we remain available for any question. Obviously, you have all of the dates here. Do not hesitate if you have a question on those upcoming workshops to reach out to us. Can you move to the next slide, Jaria, please? And as we do at every of these webinars, we close by a little call to really encourage you to share your progress with us. At the Climate and Clean Air Coalition, we are providing Secretariat services to the Global Methane Pledge. As part of your commitment under the Global Methane Pledge, you are to maintain up-to-date, transparent and publicly available information on your country's methane policies and commitment. So we very much invite you to regularly share with us information about your progress on implementation of your commitment under the Global Methane Pledge, including on your NDC 3.0, your methane national roadmap or action plan, etc. This will very much help us to keep track of how good we are doing toward achieving the pledge objective. And so please keep in touch. You can reach out to us anytime here or email, but I'm sure you have them, most of you have them already. And so once again, let me thank you very much, all of our presenters, for the most insightful information they provided the community today, but also thank all of you who have been following this whole series. And we very much look forward to continuing the good work with you. Thank you, everyone, and see you soon.